I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life from this point on, but I was sure that whatever I decided, flying would be an integral part of that life. I took refresher courses to renew my pilot certificate, including instrument ground school, and then flew with an instructor for a while to get back up to speed. My uncle Jake, my mom's older brother and the man who taught me to fly, passed away 6 years ago, leaving all of his possessions to my mom. This included 5 small airplanes behind what we called the North Barn, about 3/4 of a mile from the house. I commissioned a trio of aircraft mechanics who, in their spare time, cleaned up all 5 airplanes for FAA airworthiness certification. It didn't take very long. I paid them by the job, not the number of hours worked, and paid them very well. They found they had a lot of free time to work on my airplanes. 5 single-engine airplanes passed inspection easily, and I started selling them off to dealers, except for one, which I sold to a guy with a private pilot certificate who wanted to fly more hours and not pay exorbitant prices for airplane rentals. I offered him a particularly good deal because he reminded me of me. I didn't make much money selling Uncle Jake's airplanes, but I didn't expect to, nor did I need to. In the end, I only had one left, and I didn't even try to sell it. I loved getting it up in the air and spending an hour or two in the sky, just me and the airplane. I was sitting at a picnic table in the shade of a huge pecan tree near an old dilapidated building with a small sign identifying the place as Jess's. For the locals who frequented the place, no further description was needed. Jesse was an elderly black man who looked as if he had just been freed from slavery by Sherman's cavalry troopers who rode past the plantation on their way east from Atlanta. No one knew how old he really was, but it didn't matter. Jesse served the best barbecue in the world, though only the locals and a select few passers-by from town knew about it. Texas can be hot in late August, there's no doubt about it, but at noon, under the spreading branches of a tall pecan tree and with a breeze blowing, it was pleasant enough. A light plume of fragrant smoke rose from the smokers in the backyard, as it did 24 hours a day, making one hungry for miles around. Contrary to the apparent neglect of the place, it was so clean inside and out that you could literally eat off the floors. I came here as often as I could, which was quite often, since it lay on the best route between the big city and Mom and Dad's house, my home now. There was no way I could get used to my new home being mine. I wasn't going anywhere today. I just wanted some good old Texas brisket, so I used Uncle Jake's last plane, an old Cessna 172, to get to Jesse's house. There was a huge expanse of prairie surrounding his business, adjacent to mowed and manicured grass, and he didn't mind at all if I used part of that prairie as a landing strip. For one thing, it didn't belong to him. There were several picnic tables outside under the trees, and I sat at one of them, enjoying the day and a great lunch. I was finishing a huge brisket sandwich that was still dripping a little of the barbecue sauce I'd poured over the meat. I confidently strutted around with the borracho beans and potato salad with mustard. As I ate, I considered going back inside and eating the big slice of pecan pie that Jesse makes every day. My reasoning was that I work hard every day, and it's easy to use up all the calories I get. Therefore, a little pecan pie wouldn't hurt my waistline. That was my theory. Heck, it might even have been true. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on around me. I was vaguely aware of traffic passing on the worn 2-lane road to my left. The table was at about a right angle to the road, but I wasn't looking closely. The flickering heat waves rising from the asphalt gave me a headache. I noticed a few cars pull into the parking lot with young men in their 20s, but I wasn't interested enough to look at them, although I did hear a few female voices. I was barely 30, but given everything that had happened in my life, I didn't have much in common with people whose first digit of age was 2. I just kept eating and staring at Jesse's entrance, which was right in front of me. The brisket practically melting in my mouth occupied all my thoughts, as well as increasingly vivid images of the delicious pecan pie. And there were voices coming from the direction of the 2 tables where the yuppies were sitting, but I didn't listen, until finally something came through. "You're just going to go over there and sit with that cowboy over there?" said a voice unfamiliar to me. "Jesus, what if?" someone asked incredulously. That got my attention. Besides an old pair of comfortable shorts, an old shirt that had once been blue, and a pair of sturdy hiking boots. I was wearing a cream-colored Stetson hat. But in rural Texas, many people wore hats of that style. I started looking around to see who else might have been the subject of that comment. "He's my ex-husband," another voice replied briefly, interrupting the conversation. I recognized that voice well. Turning my head half to the left, I saw my dear ex-wife striding determinedly in my direction. My first thought, admittedly completely unchristian, was, "Oh shit, what the hell does she want?" She stopped a few feet from my desk. "I know you probably hate me," she began, "but could I sit down and talk to you for a minute?" I set aside the remains of my brisket sandwich and took off my sunglasses so she could see my eyes. My mom had taught me years ago that this was very polite. These days I did it automatically. "I don't hate you, Faye," I said quietly. Her friends were sitting close enough to hear if I spoke loudly, but I didn't think anything Faye and I said to each other was any of their business. "I hate some of the things you've done," I continued. "But hating you would be too hard for me. It takes up too much time and energy. So no, I don't hate you at all." I held out my right hand palm up, fingertips pointing to the bench seat across from me. "Sure, please sit down," I added. "Well, I wouldn't blame you if you did," she sighed, throwing one leg over the bench and putting the other over the backrest. She made herself comfortable. I really went off the rails for a while. I didn't reply anything to that. From my point of view, it was the undeniable truth, but I didn't feel the need to repeat what I thought about it. She, of all people, already knew my opinion of her act. She was quiet for a minute, then took off her sunglasses and placed them on the countertop next to mine to show me her beautiful green eyes. "What's up, Matt?" she asked, breaking the brief silence. "Very well, thank you," I replied lightly. "And you?" "I'm doing well. I go to night school, but you know that. Dad said he told you. I'm going to start next semester at UT. I'm going to be a PA, a physician's assistant." "That's great," I replied. "Glad things are getting better," I added. I didn't know what else to say. I had absolutely no interest in what she was doing. It was no longer my responsibility to be her cheerleader. So, Matt, I know that in all the commotion I never told you that I regret what I did, but I really do. Like I said, I don't blame you if you hate me, but I hope that someday you'll find a way to forgive me." "I absolutely do not hate you, Faye," I interrupted. "And I've already forgiven you." I paused to gather my thoughts. I shrugged. "I just don't have the time or energy to hate you. It would eat me alive, Faye, and it wouldn't accomplish anything. I think if I'm angry all the time, it'll ruin almost everything else in the world for me, and life, as they say, is too short." "Okay. Thank you for that," she replied. She leaned forward slightly on the bench seat toward me, pushing herself into a comfort zone she had no right or ability to be in. "I'm seeing a counselor," she said in a quiet tone. I nodded. "I think we're making some progress," she continued. "She's helped me realize that the decisions I make have consequences, and they affect not only me, but a lot of other people." I nodded again. "If I had realized how bad it was going to be, I never would have done any of the things I did, Matt. And I'm truly sorry for putting you through this." I felt my forehead furrow when she said that. Without wanting to, I fidgeted restlessly on the hard bench. Faye noticed my expression and sensed my disapproval. "What?" she asked with a note of irritation in her voice. "I'm trying to apologize and show you that I'm working on getting better now. I know it's better not to act like I did back then." "Faye, I think your counselor is wasting your time, and probably your father's money," I replied. "If that's all she's trying to get across to you. Well, I don't know. Maybe this is just the first step, and she still has some work to do." I paused to gather my thoughts. "See, when you tell me you won't do something because the consequences would be too harsh, you're saying that the punishment for whatever it is too severe, so you won't do it again." She was even more displeased. I questioned whether or not she had actually changed. "But Faye, I added as gently as possible. Don't you understand? This is a kind of risk analysis, isn't it? You say, I'm not going to do this and that because I don't want to get caught and punished very badly. You know what I mean? I pulled my left leg out to the side and moved my ass in that direction. I was going to have to leave very soon, and I was getting ready for it. But I remember reading once that someone said, honesty is doing the right thing when no one is looking. I just don't think so, Faye. Until you and your counselor get to the point where you're not tempted to do it outside of marriage simply because it's wrong, then sometime in the future you'll be tempted again and decide that under some unique set of circumstances, the consequences won't be too severe or that no one will be watching, so you won't be punished. You know what I mean? She took a deep breath. She was still annoyed, but maybe she was listening. I couldn't understand. For me, I continued, everyone gets tempted every day and we're human, we're imperfect. But if a person's instincts don't cause them to ignore temptation without even thinking about it, without analyzing the risk, then, well, I just think that sooner or later it will lead to a tragedy like this one. She looked at me, a little pissed off and clearly ready to escalate her anger. Well, I guess I'm just not as perfect as some people, she snarled. She pulled away, biting her lip. Her expression changed, and she visibly tried to tone it down. She shook her head, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly. I loved you, Matt, she said, changing the topic of conversation. Believe it or not, I really did love you. And I loved you, I replied. I proved it by never cheating on you. If she could get so angry, so could I. She had the nobility to wrinkle her nose and look away. But to tell Mom and Dad and my brothers and sisters, and everyone we knew, you call that love? I snorted slightly. Doesn't that sound like blaming the messenger, Faye? All I've done is shed light on what you and the Butts have been up to. It's like turning over a rock and watching all the slimy critters scatter, you know? I was on a roll. I took a deep, deliberate breath, forced my jaw muscles to relax and my shoulders to slump, even slump a little. And as for how it happened, I said quite sincerely, all I did was follow your instructions. She frowned and arched her eyebrows. Remember, Faye, you said you had fun with me because you could, and because it was fun. Well, that's what I used to do too. Do you know how hard it's been for me since you told God and everyone? Faye started to get defensive again. That wasn't one of my considerations, I quickly told her. You didn't think about my feelings, and you didn't care about what you had to put me through, did you? She hung her head and answered nothing. Suddenly, I was tired of talking. It had become painful, and I just didn't see the point in rediscussing something that was better left in the past. I put my sunglasses back on, stretched out my left leg, and stood up. Faye. Look, I'm probably out of my depth for bringing this up. It just occurred to me. I guess the counselor was going to bring the conversation to a better understanding of what happened sooner or later. I hope I didn't ruin her plans. And I have to get going. I'll leave you to your lunch, okay? It was good to see you. I took a half step back to clear the picnic table, then stopped and turned to Faye again. Faye, I really loved you very much, but you burned everything out of me in one day. There was nothing left. All I have left is the memory that I loved you. I'm sorry. I wish I had more. But that's all there is. Goodbye, Faye. I turned left and walked along the low wall behind the picnic area. Once behind it, I turned half left again and walked determinedly toward the gate leading to the open prairie and my little Cessna. On the way, I threw the rest of my food into the trash can. I didn't want to eat anymore, not even that big piece of pecan pie I had been craving. I would miss it later. I would have kicked myself for running off without waiting for the promised treat, but I'd had enough of my ex-wife, and I wanted to be where she wasn't. When I'd first contemplated flying from the ranch to Jesse's to avoid the hour-long drive on winding Texas roads, I'd tried, really tried, to find a pasture owner on the other side of the barbed wire from Jesse. I wanted permission to land my Cessna on that property, but I could never find the woman who, according to county tax records, owned the land. So I just used the prairie as my personal airfield and left the question of landing rights for another day. If the owner came to complain, I would stop using that grassy piece of land and apologize profusely. Jesse's lot was separated from the wide strip of prairie by a barbed wire fence with a 15-foot-long gate, located no more than 30 yards from the main entrance to Jesse's house. The gates had probably been installed long ago to allow the loading and unloading of cattle from the cattle trucks brought here. They were made of galvanized tubular steel, and if the galvanized steel hadn't rusted through over the years, the hinges and locking mechanism had. When I first got the idea to fly to Jesse's, I inspected the gates, discovered the problems at hand, and bought replacement parts. I'd spent almost an entire day working alone to fix the damn thing. Now there was a nice, wide gate with smoothly rotating hinges and a reliable latch mechanism. A woman was half reclining on the gate, resting her hands on the topmost rung. She was of average height, maybe 5 feet 6 inches or so, and of slender build. I nestled a couple yards to her left, not wanting to come up behind her and give the impression of an overbearing male. "It's a Cessna." I was about to give her the model number and tell her a little about it, its top speed and other useless information, but she interrupted me. "It's a small airplane," a gorgeous woman with raven hair said to me, turning to face me. She pushed back her sunglasses and looked at me over them. She had the most striking pair of crystal blue eyes I'd ever seen, and they were laughing at me. "It is," I replied, grinning back at her. "It barely has a front and back seat, and it can't fly as fast as the race cars on the racetrack. On the other hand, it flies in a straight line and gets places much faster than a race car," I told her. I hadn't noticed my tendency to talk before, but this gorgeous woman made me do just that. I couldn't stop smiling. She looked just as good facing me as she did from the back, looking out over the prairie as I approached. With her black hair and light caramel complexion, I figured she was of Mexican descent, but the blue eyes probably meant there was an Irish son of a gun somewhere in her lineage. And the genes on both sides were a perfect match. I wanted to get to know this woman much better. I checked. There was no wedding ring on her finger. We talked for a while, chatting about the airplane, the sky, kebabs, anything she could think of. I was genuinely proud of myself for coming to my senses and being able to have an intelligent conversation with her. So much so that I didn't make a single truly horrible gaffe. "Are you a pilot?" she asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "You don't look like a pilot," she remarked, looking me over from head to toe. "My pilot costume is in the cleaners right now," I told her with a faint smile on my lips. "Along with my Superman costume, Batman cape, and—" She slapped my forearm lightly. Over the last few moments, she'd been moving closer and closer to me. Or was it me moving closer to her? I didn't know which, but the touch of her hand on my arm was electric. I wanted more. "I'm really a pilot," I continued. "I just flew in from the ranch to taste Jesse's kebab, because I adore him, and I've been dreaming about him for the last 3 nights. I smiled happily. "It's delicious," she agreed, nodding decisively. "So, do you want to go for a ride?" I asked. "A ride?" she repeated. "You want me to take a ride in your little airplane?" she asked in a sweet tone. It seemed to me that she had been waiting for this suggestion for a long time and had already prepared herself for the phrase. What could it mean that her thoughts and mine were leaning in the same direction? I knew damn well which direction my thoughts were heading. I really wanted to get to know her better. "Sure," I replied. "I have a Mustang at the ranch. We can get there in 20 minutes by airplane. And I'd love to see you on it, with your beautiful hair fluttering behind you at a steep gallop." I told her sincerely. I meant what I said, every word of it. I could really picture it happening. God, how I could visualize it in my head. She looked me in the eye, then turned away and trotted toward the group of yuppies she'd come with. "Julie," she wailed. The girl had great lungs. I figured the drivers of a few big trucks a mile or so down the road might have heard her. Julie certainly heard her without difficulty. A short, busty brunette stood out from the crowd and walked a couple steps in our direction. Throw me my stuff. I'm going on an airplane, shouted my beauty. Apparently that meant something to Julie, because a leather clutch purse quickly flew into the air and came down just a couple yards in front of my soon-to-be Latino co-pilot. The busty brunette put her hand on it. I was impressed. Picking up her clutch, my girlfriend staggered back in my direction, tucking it safely under her left arm. She pulled her phone out of her back pocket and stared intently at the screen while I watched her. She touched a few icons and then brought the phone up to her ear. The small cloud of dust from the clutch's collision with the Texas dirt began to slowly dissipate. "Steffi?" she asked the one on the other end. "Mercy. Hey, I'm going to go on an airplane with Cowboy." "Yeah, an airplane. And we're going to go see his ranch and stuff, okay?" Mercy, huh? We hadn't gotten around to exchanging names yet. I was curious. And I didn't know who Steffi was. I knew who Julie was, the girl with the big league arm. But that was it. "Yeah, I'll be okay." She lifted her eyes and looked into mine. "It'll be fun." "Yeah, Cowboy's really nice." "No, you don't know him. He's—" I sensed someone was questioning my Mercy girl about who it was she was flying off to an unknown ranch with. I stepped closer to her and grinned. I liked being close to her. She smelled great. I pulled my wallet out of my back left pocket, extracted my private pilot certificate, and held it up to her eyes. "Yeah, I know. Wait. I know, yeah. Stephanie. Stop talking, damn it," she said with irritation. "Listen. Write this down, Mommy. I know you're worried about me, but listen, okay? Do you have anything to write with?" There was a brief silence. Mercy rolled her eyes at me and then shook her head from side to side in impatient anticipation. She took off her sunglasses to read the card I held out to her. God, what beautiful blue eyes, a cute nose with just a hint of freckles, high cheekbones, and a full mouth with lips that just wanted to be kissed. Now that the huge shadows had been removed and her eyes were unfocused while she was talking to her distant mommy, I was able to examine her more closely. Okay. His name is Matthew James Singletary. Oh yeah, Matthew. And his pilot's license. Certificate, I whispered, interrupting. The number of his, private pilot certificate is 55555555555. She continued, quickly recovering from my interruption. I liked that. She was smart and nimble. She listened again. Yeah, that's him. And if I die or something, and the cops have to go looking for the cowboy, they'll know who killed me. Because he's wearing a big cowboy hat, that's why. Mom, or Steffi, or whoever, on the other end of the conversation, took a moment to pull herself together. No, I don't know yet, my beautiful Latina said quietly. I'll call you later, okay? She closed her eyes and bit her lip, listening for a long minute. Okay, Mommy. I'll be careful. I love you too. Bye. The girl I now knew as Mercy pressed the disconnect icon and slipped her phone into her back pocket. I escorted her through the gate, glancing back at the picnic table where I'd been talking to Faye. She wasn't there, and I couldn't find her by looking around the crowd of people at the two tables. I wasn't looking. I was busy hiding Faye behind the door, labeled in my mind, "Do not open, never again." Mercy, do you always talk to your mother like that? I asked with a casual smirk. I unlocked the wide gate and opened it. That wasn't my mother, she replied. It was my roommate, Stephanie, she explained, but sometimes she acts just like my mom. Well, just shows she cares, I commented, snapping the gate shut after she passed. She calls me Mercy, because she heard my real mom call me that once. It's kind of short for Mercedes, she told me. I pondered the name change as we walked to the passenger door of the old refurbished Cessna 172 airplane. Mercedes, I said slowly, savoring every syllable as she climbed into the passenger seat. Do you mind if I call you Mercedes instead of Mercy? It's a pretty name, and different, kind of exotic, and it suits you, I commented as I closed the cockpit door behind her and carefully secured it. I was careful not to look to see if she minded me calling her by her full name, but she didn't protest, so I guess it went okay. I removed the wheel chocks from the left wheel, tossed them into the luggage compartment, and latched the door shut, then climbed into my seat. I handed her the headset on the passenger side and set it to intercom only, started the engine, and let it idle for a few minutes while I set up my own headset and checked the intercom while talking to her. I pulled away from the barbed wire fence on the huge tires of a three-wheeled chassis, pointed the old lady against the wind, and rushed across the prairie. We were in the air in no time. The responsiveness of the Cessna was one of the reasons I loved the old lady, and I turned in a wide circle to the right. A moment later, we were back above Jesse's restaurant, and the crowd of yuppies Mercedes and Faye had arrived with. A young, black-haired beauty waved frantically at them from the right seat. I tightened the throttle and made a circle above them so they could see Mercedes clearly and wave back at her. I exited the circle and straightened out on a southerly heading for a minute. Then I gained altitude again and flew over Jesse. I flapped my wings a few times to say goodbye and then began to gradually gain altitude. I chose a course that would take us to the ranch that Dad and Mom had left behind. We'd be there in 20 minutes, give or take. I leveled off as we gained enough altitude that we weren't in real danger of colliding with birds, but not so high that we'd show up on the dispatcher's radar either. As we flew, we talked. So, I stretched out. If you don't mind, Miss Mercedes. You're the first Hispanic woman with blue eyes I've ever met, no offense. She threw me a quick glance. Well, first of all, I'm not Latina, and not Hispanic either, smartass, she playfully remarked, quickly frowning. I apologize, I said, glaring at her. I didn't mean to offend you. She looked at me with contempt for a moment, and then agreed with a chuckle. You, sir, are in the presence of a true Cheyenne maiden, and the Cheyenne Nation is Native American, not Hispanic or Latino or anything like that. I studied her facial features for a long moment and smiled. Okay, Miss Cheyenne Warrior Princess. For a history project, I once read a bunch of diaries written by some mountain men in the early 18th century, and I don't remember any of them mentioning blue-eyed Cheyenne maidens. I paused to check my instruments, then pointed at the horizon again. So, come clean, I continued. Your Cheyenne warrior maidens must have Celtic blood in them. Mercedes stuck her tongue out but smiled. Maybe I have an Irish mother on both sides. Content, she joked. Ah, I said, nodding sagely, or as close to sagely as I could get. So Daddy was counting on a wandering Irish girl roaming the wilderness. Is that the wilderness of Cheyenne, Wyoming, by any chance? No. Philadelphia, she replied calmly. And Mom says she did it. She says she ambushed a poor wandering Cheyenne warrior and captured him fair and square. Says she took pity on him, and now he's all hers. I laughed, imagining the war of words between her mother and father. My mom and dad often had verbal duels like that. I think I'd really enjoy buying your parents a cup of coffee and sitting down with them for a long, pleasant conversation. They seem like nice people, I told her, patting her left hand lightly and then returning my fist to the controls. I liked touching her hand. She was well-formed and attractive. She could have been a model if I had known. Her skin was silky and smooth. Mercedes asked about Faye. She had heard Faye telling everyone that I was her ex. I told her a little about the circumstances of my and Faye's divorce and what we had talked about at Jesse's. I told Mercedes that my entire marriage and its demise was locked in a corner of my mind and explained how comfortable I was with that. I also told Mercedes, no, I don't think it was cold of me to invite her on the plane in the presence of Faye. My ex-wife was no more to me than any other woman sitting at a table full of yuppies. She explained that Julie was a maternal third cousin, and Julie had invited her and Stephanie to come to Texas for a semi-vacation before Mercedes and Stephanie's dance troupe began preparations for a fall-winter tour of Europe. Julie, I was told, had worked with Faye, but didn't know her that well. I told Mercedes that I obviously didn't know Faye very well either, after which we dropped the subject. Mercedes asked how I learned to fly, and I told her about my Uncle Jake, how he taught me all the basics of piloting and helped me fly solo at the ripe old age of 15, and how flying is now one of my favorite pastimes. What followed was us talking about everything that came to mind. My navigation was right on point. The ranch appeared over the horizon too soon for me. I spent my time chatting with this pretty Cheyenne gal. I lined up a well-developed stretch of prairie that I used as a runway and explained to Mercedes what leeward and leeward legs were. As we flew downwind and veered hard to starboard, I got the old Cessna in excellent condition to land on tricycle landing gear. I pulled up to a large shed where the tether straps and chocks were stored. We secured the airplane against any strong winds. After all, this was Texas, and Texas has nothing but wind blowing for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. Mercedes helped where she could, and when we were done, I led her through a spacious passageway in the side of the barn to the other side, where we could see the house 100 yards away. "Okay," she said, looking around. She gestured toward the house where my Range Rover was parked by the back porch. "Where's that Mustang you were talking about?" "Oh, over there," I replied, changing direction abruptly and heading toward where an ever-dwindling herd of horses were clustered against the rail of the corral. They were already watching my progress in Mercedes, practically begging for some kind of treat. I didn't have any apples with me, but they didn't know that. "There she is," I said, pointing to a 3-year-old sorrel filly who was dancing around, obviously well aware that she had become the subject of discussion. "Hey, Ginger," I exclaimed, extending my left hand to her. She readily came over and sniffed my palm, looking for something sweet. "Mercedes, I'd like you to meet Ginger. Ginger, Miss Mercedes Cheyenne, warrior princess and just a good person," I said, introducing them to each other. Ginger threw her head up and snorted. Mercedes, on the other hand, tried to hold back a laugh. "What?" I asked, completely confused. I had no idea what I had done that was so funny. I tentatively checked my fly to make sure I hadn't made some kind of gaffe, but nothing looked out of place. "I thought you said you had a Mustang," she explained, giggling. "Yeah," I said. "That's her. She was running around with a small herd in Nevada when she got caught a couple years ago. I don't know exactly how she got here, but she's a real Mustang. There aren't many of them left." Mercedes chuckled again. "I thought you meant Mustang. Car," she explained. "You know? Vroom, vroom, vroom. Such a Mustang?" I laughed. "Not really," I told her. "Why do you think I said I'd like to see you on her, like riding her and galloping?" "I thought that's what cowboys said," she admitted, grinning. I grinned just as broadly. I loved that she could make such self-conscious jokes without getting upset or defensive. In my experience, that was a rarity for attractive girls. I was really starting to like this woman. "No," I mumbled, "but I'd still like to see you. On her, and riding fast, with your beautiful hair waving behind you," I told her. And then it hit me. "You do ride, don't you, Maiden Cheyenne?" I asked. She had said something about Philadelphia during the flight, and I was sure that a whole bunch of women in Philadelphia had never been around a horse, much less learned to ride one. "I have," she declared with a smirk. "Summer vacation with Grandpa running elk, you know," she explained. "But I'm not riding in this," she said sadly, pointing to the shorts she was wearing. "I'll get so worked up I won't be able to walk for a month on Sundays." It was true. She would indeed chafe, and I wholeheartedly agreed with her refusal to go in those shorts. I didn't want those smooth, creamy thighs to get irritated. I didn't want that at all. That was why she couldn't ride in that outfit. I pressed my lips together. There had to be a way around this problem. An idea tickled in my head, but there was no way I could focus it. For a moment, I dismissed it. I smiled back at her. I was beginning to like that mischievous grin of hers. A thought occurred to me. "Ah, what about you?" "Cheyenne," I asked. "If you don't mind me asking?" She threw a quick glance at me, trying to figure out if I was really interested or trying to make a joke, and smiled when she saw that I really wanted to know. "It's like The dove that calls in the morning, she said, watching my reaction. I tilted my head to the side, pretending to ponder the title, only to discover later that I wasn't pondering a damn thing. I was seriously imagining the meaning of the name. Eventually, I nodded slowly and felt myself smile slightly. That's very nice, I suggested. A lovely idea. A lovely name for a lovely woman, I said, putting meaning into each word. She liked it. She patted my chest a couple times. I didn't even notice that she had shortened the distance between us as we talked. It was really, really nice to be around her. We made a stop at Mom and Dad's old house, loaded a few water bottles into the back seat of my Land Rover, and set out to find them. We drove cross-country to where I was sure a small herd of longhorns kept close to a spring that never dried up. The expanse of prairie beyond the boundaries of my ranch surpassed our several hundred acres. I was unable to find anyone who recognized himself as the owner of all this grass. There were some indications that it had been returned to government control. However, no one came and said we couldn't let our cattle graze there, so I took advantage of that. The longhorns could be anywhere within an easy day's walk of the spring. We found the spring easily enough, and while Mercedes walked around, I took the opportunity to clean the drain a bit. We then drove a few miles north and then west, skirting the butte, where we found cattle making their way down the dry ditch to the water we had just left. We parked and watched their leisurely movement. Mercy couldn't get excited about the distance between the tips of the horns of these animals. To give her something to talk about, I started telling her about the history of longhorn cattle and a little about the history of the region, including the ancient ruins below the top of the mountain we had just passed. She wanted to see those ruins someday. I promised to take her. I told her about the bison too, but they were already far away, most likely in another direction, since they and the longhorns harbored a persistent distrust of each other, and the afternoon was fading. We started walking back towards the house, talking about this and that, nothing memorable, just friendly conversation. By the time we got back to the old homestead, the shadows had already thickened. I drove around the house, noticing the pool and hot tub in the backyard. Then we drove a bit down the hill to the county road so I could show Mercedes the little house that Mom and Dad let me live in from the time I was 15 until I went to college. I also showed her the plowed field, now overgrown with almost even furrows, that I had walked in several times a day when I was a kid. I told her that I started running in that field when I decided to use it as an exercise machine, and told her I was sure I did aerobics every day just getting to and from home. Back on the front porch of the main house, I turned off the engine but didn't open the door for a moment. Mercedes, I really don't want to drive you back to town. I'm having the time of my life here with you. On the other hand, I don't want it to seem like I'm holding you captive or something. So, if you want, we can go back to the city. I can get you home in time for dinner. She studied my face for a moment, looking deep into my eyes. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to fire up the grill and feed you steak and salad for dinner, I quickly answered her. Then maybe we'll take a swim in the backyard pool, and afterward we'll look at the stars when it gets dark and listen to the coyotes howl, I told her hurriedly. Mercedes looked at me carefully and then slowly smiled. She lifted her right hip and reached into her back pocket for her phone. Steefy? She asked. Hi. Listen, honey, I'm not coming back tonight, okay? Yeah, I'm gonna stay here at the ranch. I don't know, maybe tomorrow, or the day after that. Yeah, that's okay. I'll call you tomorrow. Bye. She turned to me again. Cowboy. Matt, she said seriously. Can we go inside and find that nice bathroom you showed me earlier? I was starting to like that smile of hers. Sure, I replied, tugging on the doorknob. The last one inside, has to wait, I shouted. She squeaked something unintelligible, trying to open her door. We ran up the 4 wide steps to the porch, and I pushed the door open as fast as I could. She laughed and tried to grab my arm or something to slow my run, but I was bigger and gained strength. I won the race to the downstairs bathroom, but only slapped my palm on the door and continued down the hallway to run upstairs to the large bathroom. I had been raised with the axiom, ladies before gentlemen, and I really did live my life that way. Otherwise, my mom would give me hell. I heard the bathroom door slam downstairs, and then there was silence. Or at least I didn't hear anything else. I can cook on the stove, but I like grilling outside better. Mercedes loves greens, so we split the chores. While I stoked the coals and grilled the steaks, Mercedes rummaged through the fridge for vegetables and made a lovely salad, and then made a vinaigrette from scratch. She took the salad out on the deck and arranged the plates and silverware, while I took care of the steaks. From time to time, we bumped hips as we moved, and our hands protected each other when we were about to collide. A few times, we patted each other on the shoulder or arm, just to touch, while we talked about nothing important. It had been a very long time since I had someone to share such pleasant moments with. I found that I really enjoyed it, and I thought she did too. Mercedes put our plates next to each other, not across the table from each other. And so we ate dinner. I liked that a lot. We talked quietly in the thickening dusk, not discussing anything important, just two people getting to know each other. For having only known each other for a few hours, we were terribly comfortable with each other, exchanging ideas and opinions easily and reaching out to touch each other from time to time. After clearing the table and loading the dishwasher, we moved to the two lounge chairs on the deck. I had already pulled them closer until there were only a few inches between them, and she didn't mind. We stared up at the night sky for a long time, making up names for the constellations we couldn't identify and wondering if that silvery speck moving quickly across the night sky was a space station or a UFO. None of us really cared. When it was a little cooler than the heat of the day, we packed up and walked off the deck and back to the house. At the door, Mercedes stopped abruptly, and I faced her. "I never do that on a first date," she told me quietly. "It's okay. I don't know how to ask for it on a first date," I assured her. In fact, I didn't even think about it being a first date. Later, we moved on to bed. Chapter 5. We had a hearty breakfast of bacon and scrambled eggs with toast and jam. I learned that she was a proud member of the North American Carnivore Association, which I had never heard of. I assumed she was a true carnivore, as she had quickly straightened up her steak last night and had just eaten all the extra slices of bacon on the table. She admitted that no such group existed. I said we should create one. She sat on my lap and kissed me. I was over the moon. Breakfast is really a great way to start the day. With one of my t-shirts on and nothing on, Mercedes found her phone and called her friend Stephanie to check on how things were going. They talked for a bit. I pretty much ignored them, and after pulling on jeans and boots, I spent some time taking the trash out behind the barn to the fire pit for burning and sweeping out the part of the big barn set aside as a stable. I went back into the house and grabbed a can of soda from the refrigerator. Mercedes had already ended the call, and her phone was on the charging station in the sideboard with mine. And then it hit me. Exclaimed I. I had just realized what was bothering me about blue jeans, Mercedes, and horses. Mercedes looked at me doubtfully. Mom's stuff. She left it all behind. I made a chopping motion with my right hand. Let me back off. Mom and Dad didn't need that ranch anymore. They gave it to me to sell to whoever I wanted. They left in a big van to drive around the country and told me that anything I wanted in the house I could have, and anything I didn't want I had to burn, okay? Mercedes nodded briefly in response to my version of events. And some of Mom's stuff, they're all clean and stuff, are in here, like a pair of blue jeans. I gave her an appraising look. I bet a pair of her jeans would fit you. Good enough at any rate. You could skate around in them, if you still want to. She nodded happily. We ran upstairs. I showed Mercedes where my mom's old closet was, and she started rummaging through its contents to find a pair of pants or jeans she could wear. I busied myself by opening my laptop and launching a video chat app. Just out of courtesy, I was going to ask my mom if we could borrow some jeans. And besides, I had to call them. "Hi, honey," my mom greeted me when the connection was established. "I've been thinking about you. How are you doing?" Just fine, Mom. Sold Chip and Tadler last week. Those were our two horses. And I think I have a buyer for the buffalo. Don't know if there will be a deal in the next 3 or 4 days or not. Other than that, most of the farm equipment is sold, and things are going pretty well, I think. How are you doing? I heard a muffled giggle from the direction of Mom's closet and a few soft thumps. When I looked over, I saw Mercedes pulling a rather large box out of the closet. I started listening to Mom again as she talked about the Meteor Crater National Landmark, and wasn't Winslow, Arizona in some song once upon a time? Without thinking long, I told her that Winslow was featured in a song by the Eagles called Take It Easy, and let her know when it came out. She was thrilled. I didn't bother to tell her that it was a quick search on Bing that made me seem super knowledgeable, even though I was actually as clueless as my mom. Mercedes caught my eye, holding out something I guessed she'd found in the closet. I looked at it, and my jaw dropped. After a second or two, I grinned. Mercedes was holding a pair of fur-lined handcuffs in her right hand and the same kind of ankle cuffs in her left. I took the handcuffs from her. "Mom?" I asked. "What is this, pray tell?" I took the handcuffs in my hands. The key to them was attached to a metal chain. I waited, letting the cuffs dangle and twist in front of the laptop camera. "Damn it, Tom! I thought you cleaned out the closet!" Mom asked furiously, directing the question to the left, off the screen. "No," laconically remarked Dad's voice. "You said you were going to take your box of stuff and put it in the van, honey. Remember?" Mom turned around and pressed her lips together. "Well, honey," she finally said, somewhat tokenistically, "sometimes moms and dads get pretty frisky. And—" I interrupted. "Mom, I know about the birds and the bees, okay?" I had to grin. "Now tell me what they are." She took a deep breath, clearly trying to think of a way to get away with giving some sort of answer. Eventually, she shrugged. "Matt, honey, your dad and I, we're old. Older than you. But we're not dead." She showed her teeth in a carefully calibrated grin. "And we like our fun and games, okay?" Mercedes held out a double harness to me. I blinked, then held it up in front of my laptop camera. "What's this, Mom?" I asked. Mom took another deep breath. "Well, shit," she began. She looked off to the side. I was sure that's where Dad was lurking. "Damn it, Tom. You should have reminded me about the box, damn it." She didn't get a response and didn't seem to be expecting one. "So, honey, maybe, like on your birthday, your daddy will be very, very lucky if, one of my girlfriends comes to his special night and we—" TMI, absolute overkill of information, but I had fun teasing my mom. Obviously, there was a lot I didn't know about my parents. On the other hand, I realized that they were an energetic, very affectionate couple and apparently adventurous. One incident came to mind. "Oh gosh, you mean when Aunt Janet came and stayed the night?" asked I. Aunt Janet wasn't my aunt. She was just a close friend of my mom's, probably a lot closer than I realized. Mom mumbled. She didn't say yes, but her mumbling didn't sound like a no either. Wow, I couldn't come to my senses. "So, when you sent me to the cabin for Dad's birthday, you were all—" "Don't be rude, Matthew," Mom warned me sternly. "I won't, Mom," I promised. "But why?" "Because I have rules, boy. When your dad gets some, me too." I didn't utter another word. My mind was blown. "Hi, honey," Mom called out. I didn't know what Mom was doing right now. She had already greeted me. "Is my son treating you well?" she asked. "Why don't you introduce us, Matthew?" she said, obviously addressing me. I was confused. Mercedes wasn't in the camera frame, and she was being quiet, so my mom shouldn't have known there was someone with me. "Son," Mom said reproachfully, "you do remember that my floor mirror is right there behind you, don't you?" I looked around. There was an old, full-length mirror against the wall that Mom kept in the bedroom, and it was pointed at just the right angle. There stood the Mercedes. I sighed. Things were getting complicated. Mom, say hello to Mercedes. Mercedes, my mom, I said, introducing them to each other. Mercedes waved her hand at the mirror, then turned around and put her face up to mine so the camera could capture her. Hello, Mrs. Singletary, she said cheerfully. Mom giggled. Honey, after that conversation you were listening to, I don't think we need to be so formal. Call me Leah. Yeah, just like in Star Wars, said Mom cheerfully. She grinned happily. Okay, Leah, Mercedes replied cheerfully. I think it's really nice that you and your son can talk so freely talk. It's wonderful. They talked for a bit, and I sort of pulled away from them. I was pretty sure my mom couldn't see my left hand caressing the inside of Mercedes's right thigh. But I wasn't sure if something like that needed to be hidden. It was a strange morning. Then my father's face appeared from the side. He said hello to Mercedes, and disappeared from sight again. The last thing I saw was the back of his head going down out of sight. Mom leaned back a little, grabbed the edge of the table, and then pitched forward again. I was confused for a second. Mama, that's, Daddy? Sweetie, I have to go now, okay? Said Mom uncertainly. Her eyes shifted as she looked at Mercedes. Don't do anything we don't do, okay? She reached out to press a key on her laptop. Mama! I jumped up before she could close the chat room. What wouldn't you do? She pondered the question for a long time. Honey, I'll give you another answer, okay? She said sweetly. Nice to meet you, Mercedes, she called out. She jabbed her finger at the keyboard and her image went out. I closed the laptop and looked back at Mercedes. I was shocked, but not alarmed. It went on like that all weekend and all the following week. On Thursday, everything changed. Honey? Matt? Mercedes asked quietly over breakfast. She had been quiet since we woke up, and I could see something was bothering her. Uh-huh, I answered confidently. I was sure I was about to find out what the problem was. You know Stephanie, right? I know. Well, I don't know if I know her, but I know who you're talking about, yes. Mercedes nodded. Can we ask her to stay with us? Is that okay with you? I was stunned. Mercedes and I were doing great. We were incredibly well suited for each other both in and out of bed. We did morning chores on the farm together, cooked meals together, walked almost as far as the road, rode horses, and enjoyed each other's company. That's how it seemed to me. Why would she want to bring someone here who could only complicate Mercedes and I's bond on an even deeper level? On the other hand, her question was about inviting Stephanie to stay with us, which was an interesting way to phrase the situation. Sure, I replied flatly. There was no point in putting up obstacles. If Mercedes didn't want to be alone with me, it wasn't going to happen, so I might as well get out of the situation no matter what happened. Mercedes immediately brightened up. Thanks, sweetie. I'll call her, okay? Sure. She took my hand once the connection was made and pulled me to her. She didn't want me to leave while she was talking to her friend. It seemed like a good sign to me. Hi, Steffi, Mercedes greeted her friend. Cowboy said yes, so it's okay. Uh-huh, we can do some exercises. The living room has hardwood floors and, yes, Stephanie, horses. Yeah, and an airplane too. Stephanie. Stop talking. She rolled her eyes, looking at me. Okay, yeah, we'll do anything. Just pack your stuff. Stephanie. Shh. Listen to me, woman. Just pack a few things in. No, you won't need much. We're pretty... clothes aren't necessary, okay? Yeah, I know. Listen, pack me a bag with my brushes and my hairdryer and... Yeah, you know what I need? Right. She said we again, meaning me and her. I liked that. It made me feel better, whatever it was. A thought occurred to me. I waved my hand to get her attention. Wait a minute, Steph, Mercedes said to the girl on the other end of the line. Does she know how to get here? I asked. All Mercedes was talking about was that Stephanie had to bring things back to the ranch. Mercedes inhaled and exhaled in frustration. She shook her head. I smiled. If she can get to the McCready airfield, we can pick her up in a Cessna, don't you think? I gave her the address and started giving her driving directions. She has GPS, Mercedes said, interrupting me. She gave Stephanie the address and looked at me. When? She asked. How soon can she get there? Mercedes asked and got an answer. In a couple hours? I nodded, looking at the wall clock. Okay, tell her we'll be there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Next chapter. We filled the afternoon hours by giving Stephanie a grand tour of the house and grounds. Stephanie was introduced to Ginger and my horse, Daddy had named her Hoss years ago, as well as the chestnut tree that I thought Stephanie should ride if all three of us went for a ride. The girls spent most of the afternoon by the pool talking to each other about the latest happenings in their lives. Mercedes would include me in the conversation and lead the discussion in areas where Stephanie and I could talk to each other and get to know each other better. For the next 15 days, the three of us enjoyed each other's company. The girls helped with chores in the morning, and then we traveled. We swam in our pool and went to the lake to ride jet skis. We did everything we could think of. I spent a little over 3 weeks with Mercedes. 1 week with her alone and 2 more with Mercedes and Stephanie together. They were the most fantastic weeks of my life. We had planned to spend our last night together, but Mercedes and I decided to just be close and hold each other. She and Stephanie were leaving in the morning, and we were all having a hard time accepting it. You know why I asked if Steffi could come here, right? Asked Mercedes quietly. I nodded in the darkness of the bedroom. The darkness was broken only by the light of the moon, ghosting through the window. If you and I had spent a couple more weeks here, alone together, I said. Tomorrow might not have come, I said sadly. And then there's Steffi's lesbianism, which she needed to realize that it wasn't what she thought it was, added I. It seems to have worked, but I'm not sure if she, drove a wedge between us. I was silent for a moment. Did it work for you? I asked softly. She sighed. I don't know, she said sadly. Maybe, she pondered quietly, if we survive tomorrow, maybe it will work. Just enough. But I didn't think Steffi would fall in love with you as much as I did, Mercedes continued in a cranky tone. Or you her. I couldn't say anything. It was so damn complicated. We were silent for a while. Do you know about me and Steffi dancing? I know. You grew up together, started dancing when you were 4 and she was a little younger. And since then you've spent most of your life preparing to tour with a troupe in Philadelphia. I know, I said. Maybe I could stay here. And find. No, that won't work, honey, I interrupted. There's nothing better than the opportunities you have in Philadelphia not here. I can't take away the dream you've had your whole life. It wouldn't be fair. And after a while, you're going to start thinking about what it would be like. And it's going to cause problems between us, no matter how much we try to fight it. I took a deep breath and exhaled. And if I followed you to Philly, you'd be so busy working on your dances that we wouldn't have any time left to spend with each other. And all this touring and traveling and stuff. I sighed again. We wouldn't have made it work either, babe. We could have discussed this further, going in the same circles over and over again. But then there was a knock on the door. Steffi sobbed, trying to hold back her crying, but not very successfully. Can I sleep with you? She asked pleadingly. Steffi had planned to leave Mercedes and I alone for the night, but the loneliness and tomorrow's separation alone was apparently causing her too much pain. Sure, honey, I said quietly, glancing at Mercedes. She nodded. Come over here and let me hold you, okay? I said to Steffi. She gratefully climbed under the blanket and snuggled up against me. I rolled over onto my back and the girls put their heads on my shoulders. We became closer than ever. After Mercedes and Stephanie left, I was lost. Completely. They didn't call or text me, and I didn't try to contact them either. We all agreed that it would only prolong the pain and solve nothing. It was just the way it was. God, it hurt so much. I went head over heels in working to sell or give away the rest of the ranch property. I sold the entire herd of cattle on the Kingsville Ranch. They were going to add them to their existing herd and use them to bring in new genes. I sold Ginger and another 3-year-old mare to a family named Ingram for $1 apiece. Fred and Sarah Ingram had 2 daughters, 13-year-old Amber and 11-year-old Pamela, who fell in love with the 2 horses. They and their father had stopped at the gate after seeing me put poponies on them one day near the gate of my property. My shirt was soaking wet when Fred pulled the girls away from me, because all the 2 young girls could do was hug me and cry openly. It made me happy to see them so happy. The rest of the horses were quickly gone too, and the bison were sold to a rancher in Colorado who was already raising another group of bison there. All the remaining farm machinery and stuff went to an auction in a neighboring county. They were sold quickly, and that was the end of it. Uncle Jake's old Cessna 172, I gave it to Gene McCready to use in his pilot training program. When I took it to him, he and one of his guys drove me home. They chatted cheerfully the whole way. I didn't invite them into the house when we got to the ranch, because by then I'd had enough of that talk. I didn't want any more reminders of Mercedes and Stephanie. I drained the pool and put a pile of rocks and earth in it. I didn't want any critters to fall in and not be able to get out. Then I searched the house for anything anyone might need, and I did this several times to make sure my mom hadn't left any more boxes of stuff behind. I got all the necessary permits for controlled arson and set fire to the old ranch house and the little house I lived in as a teenager. At my expense, the local volunteer fire department stood by while the house is burned, and we threw a party, cooking ribs, brisket, and whatever Jesse's could cook for the firemen, along with many cans of soda and bottled water. All the guys and girls stayed around long after the fire was out, eating and socializing until spouses, girlfriends, or boyfriends started calling and wondering where they were. I stayed that night in a motel, completely disconnected from everything that kept me here. The next morning, I headed out to California. Mom and Dad were headed to Yosemite, and I was going to meet them there for a short visit. It must have looked pretty funny, a 30-year-old man visiting his parents at a campground in the woods. The end. If you haven't watched the first part, look for the link in the comments or in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.